So we're going to move on to a progression of beauty, and there is a progression. It begins with God, and then it filters down to God's creation, the universe, the world, all of creation, and ultimately humanity. And so all things are true and good and beautiful. That primarily means that all things are conceived by God. So beauty comes from God. And since God is incapable of creating anything that isn't beautiful, then all things that are created by God are beautiful. So it's kind of like a mathematical equation, if you will, in theological terms. It reminds me of this. This was a popular thing when I was a kid back in the 70s. I remember there was billboards around, for those of you who are old enough to remember. And it said on the billboard, "God made me, God doesn't make junk," you know. And it's true. I mean, it was a slogan back in the day, but it's got a great deal of theological truth to it, because God does not make junk. God's not capable, because God is perfect. So God can't make anything imperfect, you know? And God can't make anything that isn't beautiful, therefore. Things are beautiful because God, their creator, is beauty itself. So when we say in the image and likeness of God, that's what we're talking about. You know, when we're made in the image and likeness of God, we are made as beautiful because God is beautiful. And so it doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter what traits you have, what personalities you have, how annoying you may be personally or whatever. It's all a part of that beauty of God, that perfection in God. And so the challenge for us is that there are likes and dislikes, and there are things that attract us to people and things that don't. But I think as far as being cognizant of God's beauty in the world and God's creation, it's incumbent upon us then to see that no matter what our personal likes or dislikes in regards to other people are or other things are, God created them so they're beautiful. So imagine yourself thinking, now I hate spiders more than anything in the world. And there's never been a spider that I've ever liked, you know, particularly inside the house. And so Father Matt and I, you know, helped to create this little chapel in the house, in the rectory at St. Teresa. And so I've always had this vow that I've made, and it's a silly vow, but I make this vow that I'll never kill any creature in the sanctuary of a church. And so that was challenged in my first parish that didn't have air conditioning. When I'm doing the prayer like this, and my alb sleeve is coming down, and then a yellow jacket crawled into my arm as I'm holding it out. Now, I was ready to scream like a little girl, but in the middle of the Eucharistic prayer, but I, with all the power within me, I just kept my arm like that, and eventually it crawled out and flew away. So I didn't kill it, so I was grateful about that. And then we were doing a prayer service with Father Jim Presta a few years back in our church here. It was a talk on Mary. And I'm sitting in the presider's chair because I was the leader of the prayer. Father Jim was giving the reflection. And as I'm sitting there, the empty deacon chair is next to me, and there's this big, black, hairy jumping spider. And it starts crawling across the chair, and when it gets close to me and I move my hand, its little front legs would go up like this, and his little fangs would come out. And I could see them, that's how big this thing was. And I wanted so badly to take off my shoe and smack it. I thought, I'm not going to kill it because it's in the sanctuary. And so Father Matt and I are in prayer a couple of weeks ago in our little chapel in the house, and this big, almost I said a bad word, this big spider started crawling up the brick wall, and I broke my vow and I took my shoe and smashed him. So, but that spider, that yellow jacket, that ugly centipede, millipede, whatever you want to look at in the world, God created them. And so they're beautiful and they're perfect. You know, because God created them in his perfection. Now, we may not like them. In fact, I hate spiders. Even outside, I don't like them. I understand their role in the order of creation, but I still don't like them. And so we may not like something, but that doesn't diminish their perfection. It doesn't diminish their beauty, because God created them. God created mosquitoes, and how many people in the world have been killed by mosquitoes, you know? Millions upon millions. God created the flea that caused the bubonic plague that wiped out a third of the world's population, or a quarter. And so, I mean, God created all these things, and they're beautiful. We may not like them subjectively, but objectively, theologically, they're still beautiful because God created them. And so I just want to impress it upon you, because that's a really key part of this conversation when we talk about beauty. And it is objective. Again, it's not subjective. And so we have to let go of that. And for the next 4 weeks after this, if you come back, and I hope you do, we'll talk more about that. But that's probably, at least for me, that's the hardest thing to let go of. Because there are things objectively that I don't want to appreciate as beautiful, but they are, because God created them. And because the world is a creature, God is present in it and able to reveal himself to the person who's attentive to it. And so this is where I have a particular love of nature, and you'll see throughout the 5 weeks, you'll see some of my photos, including this one that I've taken over the years, because I really do sense God's creation and beauty in that creation. And I've been privileged to see more than half of the national parks. I think there's 62 national parks in this country, and I've seen about 34 of them. There's still a lot to go. But as you look at them, I mean, it's just, you look at a mountain like that, it's hard not to recognize that as something beautiful. And it's hard not to recognize that God created that, you know? And I think probably the thing that's been most impressive to me in terms of God's creation is to look at the sequoia tree. How many people have seen a sequoia tree? Raise your hands. Okay, so a lot of you have, okay? And so the first time I saw a sequoia tree, particularly the General Grant tree, which I think is the biggest tree, or one of the biggest trees on the face of the earth, it's also over 3,000 years old, which means that tree was growing when Jesus walked the earth. And so, too bad Jesus didn't visit California, but is that tree is immense. And as you stand there, and you got to look at it, you know, like if this is a tree here, you've got to stand there and look straight up and look at it. And as you look at that, I don't know how you can't experience God's creative beauty, because there's nothing like it on the face of the earth. And how does something like that happen? I mean, there are some people, atheists, other people who don't believe, who would just say that's a random act of creation that has nothing to do with God. But I don't know how, I can't come to that perception, because it's just not within me to do that. I look at that and I see the face of God, because it's just an incredible thing to see. And so the whole world is a creature. Now, I think sometimes we think of creatures in terms of living things, but that rock is God's creature. You know, that tree is God's creature. The soil is God's creature. You know, all of those things, because they are ultimately created by God. And so it's another way we kind of have to look at creation, is not just in terms of living things, but the world itself, the universe itself, the uninhabitable planets of the world are all created by God. So Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, tells us that the elevation of the soul begins with earthly beauty, where the soul ascends progressively to spiritual beauty, arriving finally at the beauty of the one who is also the good and the beautiful. So Christian theology affirms what Plato tells us as well. So it begins in that contemplation of earthly beauty, seeing those things, seeing that spider, that hornet, that centipede, that rock, that tree, that mountain, that spring, seeing all of those things, and people, of course, seeing all of those things in their beauty. The more you can be attentive to that beauty, the more your soul ascends progressively to spiritual beauty, arriving finally at the beauty of God, you know? Because the more we experience beauty in this world, the more we experience beauty in our lives, the closer we come to God, because God ultimately is beauty, because God created all that is beautiful. And so it's a really cool thing to think about and to pray about. And so whenever we delight in the beauty of creation, we are implicitly delighting in their creator, God, who is happiness itself, you know? And so one of the things that I've been experiencing as I've started working on this series is all these words that we tend to lose touch with in our lives because of all the challenges. You know, things like happiness, peace, communion, beauty, love, and all that. You know, it's an opportunity for me, at least, to stop and smell the roses, as they say, a little bit more, and to recognize the beauty that's around us. You don't have to go to a mountain or a Sequoia National Park to see God's beauty. All you have to do is look in your life and look at the things that are going on in your life to recognize God's beauty. We cannot be truly beautiful as persons unless we stand in the right relationship to the supreme beauty or common good of the universe. So if we want to be beautiful as persons, again, the more we can experience the supreme beauty of the universe, God, the more beautiful we are as people in terms of our own perception of that. Our accepting the world with wonder and gratitude inspires our desire to treasure and care for the world. And so again, wonder and awe, it's one of the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. Wonder and awe, as we kind of see those things, like my experience of seeing a sequoia tree close up, that inspires wonder and awe, and that connects us to God. And when we experience that wonder and awe, that also leads us to a sense of gratitude. Now I'm going to talk about this next week with my experience of the Blessed Mother, and there's going to be an owl in there. I've talked about it in the bulletin, but I'll flesh it out a little bit more next week. But when I first saw an owl in a tree that I had been looking for years, my first response to that was to give thanks to God for it. And it seems like a silly thing, and maybe if I flesh it out, it'll make more sense, or maybe it won't. But at least for me, when I saw that owl in the tree, this thing that I've been searching for years in the swamp, my first reaction was to give thanks to God, because I was connected to that beauty. I was connected to that reality of God, because I saw God in that owl, And so when we have that experience of beauty like that, it helps us to appreciate where that beauty came from, and that beauty comes to us from God. And so that gratitude is something that's very important. And then what it does when we experience that wonder and that gratitude, it inspires us to want to take care of the world, And that's something that we're looking at today, in terms of all the things that are going on that threaten this world, deforestation, global warming, all the rest. It helps us when we experience that beauty, when we connect with that beauty of God's creatures and God's creation, then that does kind of inspire us to want to protect it, to want to nurture it, to grow it. And so, I applaud people that go out into the world and try to make it a better place because of that. Even something as simple as recycling, driving cars that leave less of a footprint in the world, all of those things are a response to that connection to beauty and that gratitude to God for it. So not only in the life to come, but even now our happiness is only as great as our God-given capacity for contemplating the beauty of all things. And so the less we contemplate on the beauty of things, the less we connect ourselves to God in that way. And so we're depriving ourselves of a healthier relationship with God when we don't stop to smell the roses, when we don't stop and try to appreciate the beauty that God has given us. And the glory or beauty of God is affirmed whenever people help one another. And I put that photo on there. I actually staged that photo, but when we did the March for Life one time, I saw a guy with a Packers hat on, a guy with a Bears hat on. I said, "Get together for a picture." And they're very happy to accommodate me. And so I would not be smiling if I was standing next to that guy, but just kidding. But anyways, we experience the glory and beauty of God whenever we help out one another. So whether we're helping the causes of environment to helping people, helping one another in communion, we connect to God. And in connecting to God, we connect to the beautiful that is God. And so if we are created from goodness and beauty itself, who is God, we return to it by loving and delighting in it, by centering our lives in it and making its love and delight the abiding intention of our lives. And so the more we experience beauty, the more we connect to it, the more we're conscious of it, the closer we are to God. And then our lives are changed because of it, because the more we're connected to God, the more we're able to go out into the world and proclaim that good news. So there is certainly an evangelization that occurs when we are connected to the beauty of God in the world. And so I'm going to pause there. And one more question. Good question, too. How does someone who does not believe in God encounter beauty? You know? To what do you think they attribute the source of the beauty? So maybe you know someone who's like that, or maybe you just imagine. But how does someone who does not believe in God encounter beauty in the world as an objective reality? I suppose, one thing would be to say that all beauty is subjective if we don't believe in God. But how might you answer that question? How does someone who does not believe in God encounter beauty, and to what do you think they attribute the source of that beauty? So just talk about that for a few minutes.